Welcome to the Blonde Runner podcast with Coach Lora Erickson, where she shares her healthy living tips as a running and triathlon coach and mother of 4.
Hello, friends. It's Coach Lora, and I wanted to talk about facing fears today. So today is an exciting day. I faced one of my fears, and I went snowboarding for the first time. I actually did wreck pretty badly when I was young with skiing, and so I've always kind of been afraid of going skiing or going snowboarding, and that was like years ago. It was with my boyfriend like way back when in high school, and I totally biffed it. And honestly, when I grew up, I was a runner, and so it was a big no-no to go skiing, and so I think probably that got in my mind. Anyway, so I've always been afraid. Fears are something that often stop us, and I know I've wanted to face this fear, finally had, the nudge from a friend and encouragement to do it. And so I faced it, I did it, and it really wasn't that bad. I think we often visualize the worst things that can happen, and we're afraid that will happen, but we also discount that it isn't always in our control, but a lot of it is more in our control than we give credit for. So I'm really, really proud of myself because it is hard to face your fears. It's something often that grows bigger with time. And so it's been a lot of years since that happened. And I always recommend, it's like if you get bucked off a horse, you should get back on right away. But I didn't with that experience, and it just kind of became this thing that I feared. And so it's still scary a little bit too, because you have to develop skills for it. And so in time, I'm sure I'll get better and better, but it wasn't as bad as I was worried about. And so I just want to talk about this fears thing because I have overcome other fears. One of my fears was cycling. Being a triathlete, you have to cycle. But one of the reasons, I think you have to kind of dig deep and realize, why are you having these fears? And for me, I had cycling fears because I rode my bike when I was little. I delivered newspapers, and I actually loved riding up and down, and I really never had much of a fear at the beginning. But my PE teacher in middle school is what it's called in Colorado. She, over one of our breaks or something, she was a big cyclist. She came back in a wheelchair. She had been hit. And after that, I was really kind of trepidatious about riding my bike, and I was nervous. But in high school, I saw a picture of Ray Browning and learned about the Ironman triathlon and set myself a goal to do one day. It wasn't until after I ran collegiately and then finally did do a triathlon, but I had to face my fears at that point. I had cycled some. My kids cycled. I taught them how to ride their bikes and all that. So it wasn't something I avoided completely, but I still had in the back of my mind that fear. And so, pretty, I don't know, when I started cycling for doing triathlon particularly. So, it's after I had some kids, and then I got, a road bike, and then I started training. I did have a wreck and kind of hurt myself a little bit there. That didn't help. That didn't help the fear. Okay. So sometimes these things happen. And then I was hit on my bike by a truck in a roundabout close to my house at the end of my ride. I remember it was a day I was afraid of cycling still, and it was a day that was a little overcast, a little rainy. I had my light vest on, and I'm a very cautious rider, and I still got hit. I ended up having knee surgery. I had a concussion and a headache for months and months and months. But it also propelled me in the sense that I didn't want to die before I did my first Ironman. So I did train for an Ironman, and I did complete my first Ironman within a year of that accident. And so I decided after that I didn't want it to be like snowboarding or skiing. I didn't want to wait forever, and I needed to face this fear because I really loved to cycle, actually, and I really loved to do triathlons. And so I had to figure out how am I going to get back on my bike. And I will say, when I first got back on my bike, I would often cry. And I also found that there were some days I couldn't. And so I gave myself permission I set up a bike at home, and I had it on my trainer. And so if it was a beautiful day outside, but I still couldn't get out and ride, I just had too much fear that day, I would allow myself to ride inside. And so I had that out, I guess, and I still could get my training in. And that was a real help to me because it kind of took the pressure off. And often I would choose to go outside anyway, but it just allowed me that escape if I needed to have that. But obviously, having signed up for an Ironman, and I had to train, I had to get the mileage in. And so luckily by my house, we have something called a paved trail called Legacy, and I loved it. So I would actually drive down with my bike and then ride on that, and I wouldn't have to worry about cars at all. And that really helped me because I could expose myself to riding without the conditions. There's no traffic. There's other riders, but that's it. And so I could experience cycling without the dangers. And so for me, that was really therapeutic. I did end up going to therapy, just one session actually, for post-traumatic stress disorder, because obviously when you've had something like that happen, you often do have that. And for me particularly, it wasn't as helpful as I was hoping. I found more help I'm kind of a self-help person anyway. I found a lot of articles online and read a lot of things and really tried to help myself out of it, because ultimately I was responsible for getting through it, right? But one article that I read really helped me, and it talked about this concept of exposure therapy. And that's exactly what I had to do to get through it. Is I eventually got brave enough to ride around the roundabout that I was hit in. And now every time that I ride in the spring, I get a little anxious again, but I ride through the roundabout and ride to the trail or out on the roads now. And it did take some time, but I found as I exposed myself in a safe environment around that roundabout, when nothing happened bad, eventually I still think about it when I go around the roundabout, but I don't have the emotion that was attached to it. I don't have like the panicky where I have to stop and take breaths and things like that. But it took some time. It's been quite a few years now, but I just want to kind of share that concept of exposure therapy. As I've kind of studied about facing fears, a lot of it's exposing yourself. A lot of times we have fears as a way to protect ourselves. So it's not always a bad thing. If we let fear stop us, I think that's when it turns into a limiter, which we don't want. And as you have those positive experiences, me going through that roundabout, not getting hit, and not getting hit, not getting hit, right? I'm going to be able to do it better and better and better. You know, if we tell ourselves, oh, we couldn't do it, we could get hurt. That's pretty much everything in our life, right? If we were afraid of falling when we went from crawling to walking, I mean, we wouldn't walk, right? We expect you're going to fail. You're going to fall in life. I have run across I love quotes. And so one of the quotes that I've run across is this quote saying, falling is the cost of greatness. And I think that's true. I think as we live our life, we're going to fail. We're going to have things bad happen. And think about it. Some of the greatest inventions happened because of a mistake. So mistakes aren't always bad. And as Bob Ross would say, they're happy accidents sometimes, right? And we kind of weave them into the threads of our life, or the rug of our life, or the blanket of our life, or whatever we're weaving, right? But it becomes part of who we are. It makes us stronger. Think about the things that have defined you in your life. They're not the easy things. They're not, oh, everything went wonderful for me. It's usually the hard things, the trials. It's us tumbling down the river of life and all the hard edges being just sanded down to where we're a smooth rock by the end of it, right? That's life. It's tumbling. It's hard. We're falling. It's not easy. I remember the first time I went swimming too. I started swimming as an adult. I swam a little bit when I was a kid. I've taken some classes and swim lessons and things, but I always thought it was way cold, and I was always on the side of the pool, because wanting to get out because it was so cold. This is before I really knew about lap swimming and how warm you get when you lap swim. But I started swimming in my 30s. I started swimming for triathlon, really, and so I didn't really know technique and all those things. The first time I tried to swim and get across the pool, I stopped. I was out of breath. I couldn't, even though I was a good runner and I was in good shape, it was new. It was scary. I don't want to make a fool of myself, right? And all these things that we often put in our own head that are limiting to us. Most people don't really care about what other people are doing at the rec center. They're worried about themselves. So, or at the pool or wherever we're at. So sometimes we kind of limit ourselves. So another thing I would say is be aware of your self-talk. What is the script you're telling yourself? What are the things that, whatever you're fearing, what are you telling yourself about that? And can you change that script? Can you make it so it's more positive and I can do this kind of thing? For me, like getting hit by the truck, there was no question I was going to go back out on the roads. When and how and all that, I didn't have all the answers, but as time went on, I figured it out. And so it was never a no way. And maybe you've no-wayed some things in your life that you can change to a maybe, that maybe in time will become a yes, and I can do it. Now, there's always risk. I mean, no matter what we do, like I said before. Another thing I like to think about is, like, we can't, for me, I realize, and maybe this is something important for you to maybe identify, there are triggers. When I ride my bike outside and I hear a certain revving of an engine of a truck, which is what I heard before I was hit, I have a kind of a response to it. Usually my legs get noodly and I kind of hold my breath and my heart beats fast and I feel all these things that I really can't control, but I can control my response. What do I say to myself when I'm feeling those things? Take a deep breath. You're okay. Pull over to the side if you have to. Stop your bike, whatever. I realize that I cannot control when I'm going to hear that noise. I can, unless I'm just not around traffic at all. But for the most part, I don't know, but I can control how I'm going to react. And so if you can identify your trigger, you can figure out what is it that causes that, then you can figure out what you will do. I tell myself, breathe. Because sometimes especially right after, it would start sending me into a panic attack. Not anymore, not so much. I'm more used to the sound. I don't have that response. So in time, it does get better. But I recognized that and I realized what it was. And I had actionable plan. Like, what am I going to do when I feel that? I think that goes along for anything. Another thing, I think it's important to allow yourself to feel the emotions. Sometimes we want to avoid unpleasant emotions, but the truth is, what you resist persists. It really will. If you keep resisting something, you sometimes just have to let it, feel whatever it is. If I'm feeling panic, my heart beats fast, I get a little out of breath, then I just experience it. I lean into it, I let it just happen, and then it goes away. And did it really hurt me? Am I like on fire? No. Did it really affect a whole lot of anything? Not really, right? It caused a little reaction and then it went away. So I think sometimes we are so afraid to feel that emotion. Just let you feel. What does an emotion really feel like? And I think every emotion's a little different. But a lot of times we can exacerbate that emotion, make it a worse response, or we can, often when we're excited for a race, it's kind of the same thing. We're experiencing the same feelings and emotions as when we're anxious, right? And it's a good emotion to be excited, right? But it feels exactly the same. We just put a name tag on what it is, and we decide it's negative or positive. Feelings aren't negative or positive as much so. They're really just an emotion and a feeling. And easier said than done, and sometimes they're unpleasant, but unpleasant isn't always bad either. So a lot of times you do get a good thing out of an unpleasant emotion. So what about allowing yourself to feel it? For me, I like to do meditation. I think we often put a lot of time into our training, but we don't put enough time into our mental training. Like, I like to do meditation because it purposely allows me to work on controlling my thoughts or my mind or what I'm feeling, and also being present. Usually fears, when you're having a lot of fear, it relates to the past or the future, not the present. The present feels better usually because we're in control. When we start worrying about what if this happens or what if that happens, it hasn't even happened, right? It's like putting an umbrella up when we're expecting rain next week and we're putting it up today, right? And when we don't need to. So sometimes we're causing this panic or bad feelings or bad emotions or bad feelings when we shouldn't. We're jumping the gun. We shouldn't do that, right? So meditation allows you to control that, or learn to control that, or be present. Feel the wind on your face. Feel the breath, the air going in your nose and out your mouth and into your lungs, and it allows you to be present. So I think if you can be mindful of creating more mindfulness in your life, it will probably help you cope with the fears that you have. But identify what those fears are. What are things you're afraid to do? One of the things that I am doing right now with my athletes is I do a 30-day challenge where they have to do something maybe they've never done before for 30 days. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Maybe it's even creating a new habit, drinking water every day for 30 days, the amount that you need. Doing, reading or listening to a TED Talk, or maybe listening to a podcast like this. Please follow, please subscribe. But anything like that improves yourself. It could be intellectual, emotional, social. It could be any area that relates to health, I would say. Even, of course, eating right. Those kind of things are good too. But sometimes we focus on those and we don't focus on mental things. So maybe meditating every day for 15 minutes. Maybe listening to relaxing music. Music is super therapeutic. That often can, if you can reassociate a bad experience with something that's positive. I know in my life I've heard of this before, where maybe someone doesn't like chicken noodle soup because every time they had it, it was when they were sick, so they associate it, right? You could also create new associations. Like as I'm meditating, or I've just had a wonderful experience, I can associate it with a smell or a lotion or something. And then every time I smell that lotion, it reminds me of that experience. Same thing, why do you remember Christmas when you smell a cinnamony candle, right? Or a pine smell reminds you of things around Christmas. So you can create smells with meditation. I've done that a little bit, and that's very helpful for me. But you can learn how to control your reaction to responses. You can even imagine those triggers and how you might respond and what you might say to yourself or how you feel. But I know a lot of times, and this I don't really have the answer to this, but I know I was talking to a friend about dealing with emotional problems logically, and that doesn't always work. And so you have to tackle it on an emotional level. I'm not sure how always, but I know for me there was an emotional response I had going through that roundabout, and I created a positive response by what I told myself going through that. I'm okay, and talking myself through that. So kind of keep that in mind. You can't always, not everything is always logical on how to deal with it. But if there are some things and emotions that you can identify as triggers and figure out ways that you can maybe not trick yourself, but create a new memory pattern associated with it, I think that would be really good. Things that I've read about as well. I mean, some people actually bribe themselves to do something that's hard and maybe give themselves a reward, or find a way to create positive reinforcement for yourself, just like you would do for a child. But you can certainly say, hey, if I'm going to have this monumental thing, I'm going to get myself this, and then it's associating that. There is a lot of association with things oftentimes, and maybe we don't want to do that all the time, but emotions are tied often to those things. But you can control some of that. So I would say that's the biggest thing, is look at what you can control and find ways to expose yourself to positive things and associate with that. But again, just some things I wanted to share. I think everybody has different fears. Maybe snowboarding or, skiing is no big deal for you. Maybe, being hit by a truck might be a big deal to anyone. But I would say, you can get through whatever you've been through. And some people have been through a lot more difficult things. But absolutely, I'm no therapist. Running has been a big therapy thing for me. I know a lot of people, when they're facing fears, it could be associated with a loss as well. And so I do a Race for Grief event. I'll be talking about that more in one of my next podcasts. But there is kind of a fears that are associated with loss and grief. And so just explore for you what maybe everybody has fears. So what are your fears? What are things that trigger those fears? And what are you grieving a loss from? For me, it was the freedom of, being worried about being hit and things like that. So there is a lot of association there too. I just want to throw it out there. I'm going to talk about that on another podcast, but anyway, just some things I wanted to share, and I'm excited that I faced one of my fears and wanted to share that with you guys, and I appreciate your support, and thank you for listening in. Please share it with others, and as always, you can check out my website for resources on triathlon training. I am going to be offering some classes that you want to check out there too. So blonderunner.com, you can check it out there, and until next time, live well.